Hello and welcome to the Mindful Men podcast, a show inspiring men to be mindful about their lives. Each week, we'll dive into a range of topics that matter to men and hear from everyday people doing extraordinary things. So if you love the show, please give it a 5-star rating and share it with your mates. Now, before we get into this week's episode, please note that some of the content may trigger you. And if this happens, please reach out to your support networks. It's really important. If you can't get enough of Mindful Men, head over to our website. It's www.mindful-men.com.au. Find the show notes and the links to our socials there. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's get mindful. G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rooney, and today we're getting mindful about mindfulness and how mindfulness can drift in and out of our lives to help us with things like trauma, but also to break out of the autopilot mode that we sometimes find ourselves in. Now, trigger warning, we may discuss some things around mental health and trauma and abuse in this episode, and if that triggers you, please feel free to skip this episode. It's more than okay, but if you do stick around, and you do get triggered, please reach out to your support networks afterwards. And joining me for today's discussion, I've got Mark Sidney from Newcastle, England. How are you going, Mark?
Good, thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming along. I'm really excited about this conversation. Now, you're a husband, father, a mindfulness coach, yoga teacher, and an author, but you're also the director of Mindful Therapies and the director of operations at Mindful Impact. So it's quite a CV you've got there.
Yeah, Mindful Therapies is a social enterprise, so part charity, part business, which has two brands. Mindful Therapies does the social stuff, and Mindful Impact does the stuff that pays for the other stuff. So we have a meditation mindfulness center in Newcastle where we deliver donation-based mindfulness sessions, particularly around supporting vulnerable people with mental health problems and people recovering from addiction, as well as a counselling service that we operate, which is donation-based. So it's an awful lot cheaper than private counselling and has a much shorter waiting list than our National Health Service, which is wonderful, but the waiting list is months, if not years. So that's the social side. The business side is I go into businesses and deliver mindfulness courses and workshops. So mindfulness for focus and concentration, mindfulness for sleep, for self-care, for Zoom fatigue, as well as other things. And yeah, been going for 10 years. It'll be 10 years in June. The organization's been going, was set up by my business partner, Rachel. And I joined about a year later. I was running another charity at the time called Space for Peace, which was similar. So that's the mindfulness bit from that CV. And yeah, I'm a father, 2 kids, Isaac and Lydia, who are, about 56, 57 or something now. They're in their 20s, 27 and 25. I don't know how quickly that's happening, but it's happened very quickly. We're both great kids with lives of their own now.
Yeah. I love talking to Dad. I'm always curious as to what fatherhood means to my guests. So if you could tell us in your own words what fatherhood means to you.
That's about everything. The one thing that's going to be left after I'm gone is my kids. And I've got an opportunity to not mold, because that's not what happens, no matter whether you think you can or not, but influence the future through your children. And I've got 2 wonderful kids and I've influenced them. And it was fantastic that Isaac, my son, turned around to my wife Alison about 2-3 years ago when he was still at university, just about finished university, described his dad as the wisest man he's ever known. It's a fantastic thing for some of us, for some of us. And yeah, my daughter's wonderful and loves me a bit. And we're probably closer, my daughter, than I am with my son. My son's more close with mum, but just had a weekend away with my son in London. It's great just being a father. It's different at all the different stages. It's great when they're little, when they're 3 and 4 and they're learning and they look at every word and they listen to you and they look up to you. And when they're kicking out a little bit in their teens, but always come back to you. And then when they're older and they come to you for advice, and it's just it's a blessing and a great opportunity. And yeah, it should never be taken too lightly. It should be something you're always grateful for. Yeah, that's what it means to me.
Yeah, lovely. And you mentioned you're in Newcastle. Did you grow up in Newcastle?
I've more or less always been here. I went to university in Leeds. I was there for 4 years, which is only 100 mile away. In England, that's a distance. But in Australia, a stone's throw. I didn't think I would ever go back. And actually, for most of my life, up until the age of probably 25, I thought I would end up in Australia. Always loved the place. Lots of things I loved about it. The strange little things, some of the TV programs. My favorite band, or certainly one of my favorite bands, is The Church. And I've been fortunate to see them on a number of occasions. The first time when I was about 16, when I went to London with my mate, who was the same age as me, and we told our respective parents that we were stopping at each other's house and got a bus to London and slept in a bus shelter and stuff. Which, if they'd known what we were doing, they would have been out of too sure. But yeah, Church, fantastic band. And I loved Australian music in the 80s. I just thought it was fantastic. Always wanted to go. Then I met my wife, who had just come back from Melbourne, having lived there for 3 years and been married to an Australian, and it didn't work out. And she vowed she would never go back there ever again. So it wasn't until 2019 that I managed to visit Australia for the first time, which was when my son was there for a year as part of his degree. He was at the Gold Coast up in Brisbane.
Yeah, I'm on the sunny coast. So I'm an hour north of that. And then, yeah, Goldie's just an hour south of Brisbane. So it's a beautiful part of the world. And did you
Yeah.
travel much around Australia?
Yeah, well, we stayed in Brisbane for about 4 or 5 days, went out to the Gold Coast for a couple of days, and out to Sydney for a week or so, just over. I lived across to Melbourne to see a mate who I went to university with, who lives in Melbourne now. So yeah, did a bit of traveling. We were only there for less than 3 weeks, but it was fantastic. Loved it. Love it up here. Love Newcastle. But yeah, I think I could be very happy in Australia, but I'm probably too old now to be able to get a visa. But yeah, I lived in Leeds for 4 years and I came back to Newcastle, not expecting to stay. Lots of things happened that meant that I did end up staying, including meeting my wife, Alison. And yeah, probably wasn't anywhere else in England or in the United Kingdom that I would live. So, and Australia was ruled out because she was never going back. But then had kids, had a career that kind of kept me here to some extent.
Yeah. We're talking off air about you going to a Catholic school and being introduced into this concept of mindfulness, although we didn't really know it was mindfulness at the time. I'd love to hear that story and particularly how mindfulness came into your life and how mindfulness keeps coming into your life as you've progressed as well.
So yeah, Mr. Constantine was a deputy head teacher at this Catholic school, very strict Catholic school as well. So it was particularly bizarre that when a teacher was on the sick, he would come in and take the class. And instead of teaching us anything, mostly he told us sort of campfire horror stories like the monkey's paw and things like that, which were fantastic. There was one about an immortal soldier that he told us. And I can't remember the stories at all, other than little snippets. But he also taught us how to meditate. Don't remember him ever calling it meditation. He certainly didn't call it mindfulness. This is back in 1979. So very, very early on when John Kabat-Zinn was first coining the term and developing mindfulness-based stress reduction. And he would get us to sit and focus on our breath or focus on bodily sensations, so basic body scans and breathing meditation. And they felt nice. It felt calming and relaxing, and helped with focus. And I quite enjoyed them, as did some of the other classmates. Others just thought it was a waste of time and didn't know why I'd do it. And used to groan every time. That's when he said that's what was going to happen. And yeah, there was a Buddhist center down the road, 5-10 minute walk from the school. He must have been going there and then bringing these practices in. And I continued using them from time to time, went to university, didn't know anybody there who was meditating and didn't talk about it to anybody, but meditated every now and again. Things get a bit stressful, but I was also a teenager in a new city with all the freedom that gives you. Decent enough grant as a student to have enough money to get drunk most nights and yeah, party and stuff. So I didn't meditate that much, but when it was exam time or when it was things were particularly stressful, I'd maybe stop and just do a little bit of breathing and stuff, and it would help. Met this girl that I fell in love. Then we fell out after about 4 months. Still I was 18, 19. That was my longest ever relationship, 4 months at that time. And we committed to go on a holiday together. We went on holiday together. And that's the first time I really remember using mindfulness to deal with shit. So we went away, cutting a very long story much shorter. We met this Turkish guy who offered to take us sailing around the Black Sea in his boat. We agreed, and we had lots of alcohol and lots of soft drugs, cannabis, resin. And he started getting a bit touchy-feely, initially with her, but later with me as well. And on the third night, I ended up at knife point forcing us to first have sex with each other and then forcing us to have sex with him repeatedly over a number of hours. I did contemplate killing him. He had taught us how to use a spear gun, and I did load it, but she persuaded me not to because her way of coping with it was to tell herself that she was enjoying it, which certainly wasn't the case, but that's how she dealt with it at the time. I swam ashore and meditated for about half an hour until she came and swam ashore and persuaded me to come back to the boat so we could get back to Istanbul to get the bus home. By bus, it was a bus called the Magic Bus, and it was £1 from London to Athens, which is a big distance, and it was quite cheap. But it took a long time. So we had to get back to Athens, and we got this bus home, which took 3.5 days, sitting next to someone who had basically broken my heart, and basically at that time was telling me how she'd enjoyed the whole experience and wanted to go back. So I was angry, I was upset, and started using meditation for a little while to help deal with it. I'd love to say that meditation alone dealt with it, but it certainly didn't. Started drinking quite an awful lot for a little while. Started telling random people in the streets about what had happened to me to just offload it. I used drugs to some extent and used alcohol. And then slowly started coming to terms with it. And it was probably more through meditation I started coming to terms with it. It was one morning when I reached down to the side of my bed and picked up the bottle of Southern Comfort and took a swig, and then I sort of basically thought, what the hell are you doing? And I need to stop. So I went back to my department at the university. I was doing civil engineering there. I was doing a form of civil engineering called architectural engineering, which is more to do with sound and acoustics in buildings and stuff. I went to them and said, look, it's not working for me, this course. I want to do something where I understand what makes people do what they do. So I went to do a psychology degree, came out with a psychology degree. And again, I meditated off and on for those 3 years doing that degree. Didn't tell anyone I was a secret meditator. It was something weird that nobody else did, nobody talked about. Still very, very early days in the mid-80s for mindfulness. And came back to Newcastle, got a job working in a probation hostel, working with ex-offenders and homeless people. I got a job working managing homelessness hostels. Had a career for 25 years. And for most of that time, the only meditation I did was a little bit in the morning before I left for work and a little bit at the end of work. I'd do a 3-minute breathing space, but I would do it just to switch off and let go. And that helped me manage working in that environment. People used to call it, it must be lovely working in the voluntary sector, helping these poor people. No, you get spat at, you get attacked, you get assaulted, you get abused, you get threatened, and you see people make the same mistakes over and over again. And you deal with a disproportionate number of people who end up committing suicide or end up committing crimes to get themselves back locked up where they don't have to make any decisions anymore. And it's depressing as hell. But I still did it. And I ended up, you talked about autopilot at the beginning there in your introduction. And I think by the time I was director of operations of a fairly large charity, and I was probably sleepwalking through my job. I was doing it, but I wasn't really doing anything. I had a national reputation. I was chair of Homeless Links National Advisory Group, which is the umbrella body for homeless organisations in the UK. I had a national profile. I was seen as a drug expert in Newcastle, and also in terms of employment for people with lived experience. That wasn't even a term back then. And was very influential, had a big reputation. I fell out with the chief exec. Stopped trusting each other. We had 5 years where the organisation virtually doubled in size every year. And the 3rd or 4th annual general meeting, he basically described my appointment as the greatest thing that ever happened in the organisation. And a half later, he wanted rid of me. So I negotiated voluntary redundancy, and I was angry. I was a bit of a mess. and I'd lost my identity. I'd already worked for all of the main homeless organisations in the northeast of England. My kids at the time were 14 and 16. So really important school years in terms of exams and stuff. But I couldn't get a job working in the sector in Newcastle again or the northeast. I was seen as overqualified for all the jobs that were out there and a threat to the chief executives. And I turned to mindfulness partly by accident, because at the time I was still doing the bits of meditation that I'd learned from Mr. Constantine, but I didn't even know what meditation. It was just something nice and calming. But I went back to university to do a leadership and coaching qualification, or if I'm not going to work in the sector, I'll be a coach. I'll help people. I'll help people who coach, help people who work in the sector. I'll help managers deal with the stress of the job and all that sort of stuff. There were other coaches on the course who kept on talking about this thing called mindfulness. So that intrigued me, how it was helping them as coaches, how it was helping their clients. My wife got sent 2 books by her brother because she was having trouble sleeping. It's not what mindfulness is about, but she got sent 2 books, Called Catastrophe Living by John Kabat-Zinn and Finding Peace in the Frantic World by Mark Williams. The kind of the Bibles of mindfulness at that time. And she kept on saying, you should read these. And I started reading them. I said, well, this is kind of what I do anyway. And then I went on holiday to Scotland, and there was this Buddhist monastery in the middle of nowhere. So, that'd be an interesting place to go and visit. So I went there, and it was the headquarters for the Mindfulness Association. And it was just this mindfulness thing kept on coming everywhere. I then got offered a job managing a drug and alcohol rehab. And there was not mindfulness, but there was meditation, acupuncture, yoga, and various stuff on offer. And in the 18 months that I worked there, I saw more change in individuals in terms of recovery than I'd seen in the previous 30 years working in the sector. And the ones I saw the most changes were the ones who were involved in the acupuncture, and the yoga, and the tai chi, and the meditation. So it was just starting to really intrigue me more and more. Got me redundant again. Rehab's closed down. Very expensive way of treating people. Very, very effective, but very expensive. And I had a total career change altogether. A couple of guys who were documentary filmmakers wanted to set up a commercial arm that made videos for company websites. Again, I'm going back a little while. Most companies didn't have video on their websites at that time. It wasn't a dumb thing. And most people say, what was the point? Now, you expect every website to have it. So my job was business development guy for Nova Pictures, making online videos. Someone approached me involved in an organization called Peace One Day, which is an international organization based in London that set up to celebrate and raise awareness of International Peace Day on the 21st of September every year. And she wanted me to film some events. I want us to film some events that they were doing for Peace Day in Durham at the university. We got talking, and she was setting up a charity about creating physical spaces for peace in local communities. The idea was that it would be spaces where people could come together and talk about peace, whether that be global peace, whether it be peace in their community, or whether it be inner peace. And she asked me to set up this organization, to register as a charity and to run it. So I'll do that. The video business wasn't working too well. My 2 business partners, one went off to France and the other one went off to London, and the business just stopped existing. So I started running this charity, realized very quickly that I didn't have the skills to be able to teach mindfulness at that time, or yoga, or any of the other things that I wanted to happen in these spaces. So I had to try and facilitate it. So I started interviewing mindfulness teachers and yoga teachers and various other people, initially with a view of pinching all their ideas and then just doing it myself. But I realized it was a lot tougher than it looked. So I ended up doing stuff in partnership. It was my business partner, Rachel. Before I joined the business, we managed to do a program of training for a housing association, which involves some positive psychology stuff that came from coaching stuff that I'd done, some yoga and some mindfulness with young homeless 16 to 21-year-olds. And that program went quite well. We realized that Space for Peace and Mindful Therapies were very similar. Space for Peace had some problems in terms of the way the board of trustees and their level of commitment was. And I decided that I would join her at Mindful Space Therapies and became business development manager again. Again, I was not going to be teaching any mindfulness First thing I did was I won a contract with a local council that was far much more work than she could deliver on her own. So I then trained to be a mindfulness teacher. One of the things I loved about mindfulness that is very rarely popular with most mindfulness teachers was mindful movement. Partly because I had a bit of a history of martial arts and it just felt natural and it felt an easy, different way of meditating. So a few years later, I ended up training as a yoga teacher as well. But started doing a bit of yoga, restorative yoga. And I joined Rachel as fellow director of Mindful Therapies and started being really, really ill. Waking up in the middle of the night, vomiting, diarrhea, hallucinations, soaring temperature. It would last for hours and then it would die off. I'd be uncomfortable for about 2 or 3 days and then I'd be fine for about 10 days and I would come back again. Kept on getting rushed in the hospital. We kept on doing the test. Eventually it was diagnosed as Crohn's disease. But before it was diagnosed, again, it was mindfulness that came to save me in terms of my mental health, in terms of the fear about the hell is this thing? And then helped me manage it. That really helped me manage the pain and change my relationship with my intestines. So I can go back to kids and fatherhood and stuff. When my daughter was, I think, about 4, she ended up having an illness that she grew out of, thankfully, but it meant she had severe joint pain. It was an autoimmune illness. It's fairly rare, happens in kids, and they normally grow out of it. Thankfully, they get grow out of it. But basically, she was in hospital every time she moved a joint, her elbow, a knee, ankle, wrist. She was agony. And I remember all I could do was hold her and say, it's going to be all right. All I could do was offer compassion and love. I couldn't make the pain go away. And when I was lying in pain myself in hospital with the Crohn's, I started doing that. I started basically giving myself a hug. I'm talking to my intestines and saying, yeah, I know it's uncomfortable. Yeah, I know you're in a lot of pain, but this will pass. It's okay. And all I can do is do what I did for my daughter, for my intestines, is just be there for them. Might sound a bit weird, but it really, really helped. It changed my relationship to the pain quite significantly by acknowledging it and accepting it, acknowledging the pain and being with it. So yeah, I think in terms of how mindfulness has helped me more than anything of managing with Crohn's disease, it helped me with the turkey thing. It helped me with the trauma of working in homelessness. And there was some really bad stuff happened. I had a guy who was a diagnosed psychopath who had a criminal history that was about 8 pages long and had virtually every offence on it, who had a fantasy that he told someone about, which was about getting the armed response police team to take him out. And the way he was going to do it was hold the hostel at gunpoint until they called the manager out, me, and he refused to speak to anybody except me when the police arrived. And he would open the door when I arrived, and then he would shoot me and stand in the doorway so the response team would take him out. That was his plan. The psychiatrist who worked with him at Franklin Prison basically said, yeah, if he says that's what he's planning to do, he'll try and do it. So that was a bit scary. So there's a number of things like that that I meant working in that sector was quite uncomfortable at times. And mindfulness helped with that. But the biggie has definitely been how it's helped me manage. And for 5 years, until very recently, I managed the Crohn's with meditation alone. Medication has helped a little bit, but the medication I give you at the beginning is steroids, and you take that for so long. And then the next lot of medication, I had a really bad allergic reaction to, and it gave me acute pancreatitis and nearly killed me. So then the next lot of medication was too expensive, and my symptoms weren't significant enough for the NHS to give me that medication. So I managed it with meditation alone for 5 years. Just over 18 months ago now, it's flared up badly, really, really badly, to the extent that for my record, I was having to go for a crap 22 times in 24 hours. That's a lot. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of time. It's quite painful. And yeah, you don't get a lot of sleep when that's happening either. So mindfulness isn't always enough. That's when I went knocking on the door and said, I need some steroids, please. So I started getting treatment again, and touch wood, it's settling down now. I want some new medication because my symptoms had got so severe that it warranted it. But yeah, mindfulness has definitely helped me, but it's not a silver bullet. It's part of the solution to whatever you're going through. But on its own, it's not going to be enough. Using mindfulness to not be on autopilot, to not just follow what you've always done and see different ways of responding and be open. The attitudes that we apply when we practice mindfulness, like beginner's mind, are really so important. Much more important than the ability to focus on your breath. It's the attitude you bring to your practice, the non-judgment, the beginner's mind, the acceptance, the letting go. When you practice those, then it makes a massive difference. But it also gives you the insight to make better decisions about how you deal with whatever you're dealing with. So mindfulness is now very much a part of my day-to-day life, but it hasn't been always, but has been for probably like 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, it's an incredible story there, and I like to listen to the stories. And sometimes they're a short story, sometimes they're a long story. And for me, mindfulness is a lot of self-reflection. It's a lot of looking inwards and going, how am I showing up the way that I want to show up, or how am I not showing up the way that I want to show up, and doing that inner reflection. And yes, it is meditative state, it is breath work, it is
Mm.
meditation. I love how you said you're doing mindfulness-based movement as well, because I do a program called Mindfulness on the Move as well,
Yeah.
which is tuning into our five senses as we're walking around, trying to calm the mind and body. But I think mindfulness as well, and part of the reason I do the Mindful Men podcast is to help other men become mindful of what's going on in their lives through the stories of other people. So, for example, your story, someone might out there might go, "That happened to me too." And hearing Mark talk about this, like what happened in Turkey, like that's full on. You were raped,
Yeah.
essentially. And for other guys to hear that, particularly for guys who traditionally bottle things up and we don't tend to share what's going on and talk about what's going on. And I think a lot of traditional masculinity has informed that as well. It's the suck it up, move it on, keep
Oh,
pushing
sure.
through. And to hear these stories can help other guys be mindful, go, you know what? I don't need to keep bottling this up. I can actually talk about these things. And it's actually a healthy thing to do within the right channels as well. So it's
Yeah.
about finding that person who can provide you a safe space to open up and talk things through, but also do that in a non-judgmental way as well. Because some of this stuff is hugely traumatizing. I can imagine for you as a young man, what happened to you, what was going through your mind? You talked about talking about it with people at bus stops and so forth, but what about internally? Like your parents, did you see authorities, counselors, or anything like that? Could you talk to
Yeah.
them about it?
I didn't tell my parents about it. I didn't tell any counselors about it. I didn't tell any authorities about it at all. I talked to some friends, and some of those friends didn't respond in as a supportive way as would have been helpful at that time. But I kind of understand why now, but I didn't at the time. At the time, they were just horrified. They didn't know what to say. So they sort of closed down. But yeah, internally, I was going through all sorts of stuff. Yeah, questioning my own masculinity and questioning my opinion because of the way that she'd responded at that time before I had a deeper insight into it. And that insight came from that self-reflection stuff that you were talking about. It didn't come from anyone pointing it out to me. It didn't come from counseling or anything like that. It came from the insight that came from meditation. And again, as I said earlier, meditation without the backdrop of the training in mindfulness and understanding it all, it was just trying to work it out, figure it out in my own head. I wish I'd had someone who could have sat with me, whether it be on a one-to-one basis or gone to a group meditation. If I'd known such things existed, which they probably did, group meditation, group mindfulness stuff can be so supportive. We run a group called Mindful Space, which is a sort of mental health support group, which involves a bit of meditation and a check-in where people talk about their mental health and talk about what's going on for them. And it's a mixed group, but I've done stuff for men specifically. And what I've found is in groups, if it's a mixed group, men tend to shut down and don't feel necessarily as comfortable talking about feelings and stuff. But when it's just men, they open up and actually get it and understand it and really benefit from it in ways sometimes more than I've ever seen in some of our female clients, because we've never had the opportunity of felt safe to be able to open up. And yeah, I think that me talking to people at bus stops and stuff was me developing that skill of being able to open up, but not necessarily in a safe way. And now there are so many places where there are groups where there is that opportunity to open up in a safe way. You asked about my definition of mindfulness. It's an interesting question because I think one of the issues with mindfulness is it is so misunderstood and there are so many different definitions. And I've been working on trying to come up with one of my own. I think the closest I've got to it so far is knowing what's happening now so that I can live my life on purpose. And it's a little bit with what you were saying there about it's keeping on track. It's tuning into your own values and what's important to you and living those values moment by moment, because it's so easy to get caught up in what people's expectations are, what you should be and what you shouldn't be, and how you should be in any given situation. Being yourself, and being true to yourself in any given moment. And you can only do that if you're paying attention in the present moment. Otherwise, we just slip into those patterns, those autopilot behaviors that we've always done.
Yeah, I love that definition there. I'm often talking to the average bloke in Australia about mindfulness. I'm banging on about it all the time, and often people
Yeah.
kind of turn their nose up at it and say, "Well, that's a bit hippie." And you were there from the start. I'm talking like 70s, before I was even born, you were doing this type of stuff. How have you seen it evolve over time? Because I feel like it's quite a contemporary practice. In my mental health journey, I've only heard about it in the last, say, 5 years or so in my own therapy. I've been in therapy
Yeah.
for 11 years, and it's only been the last 5 years that therapists have been showing me mindfulness. And then that's where I developed the interest in it and started pursuing it myself. How have you seen it evolve over the years and the work that you've been doing?
It's an interesting one. I think what's happened in the UK, and I don't know whether it's quite necessarily the same in Australia. In the UK, it's very much seen as a mental health thing. So the focus in this country very much around that clinical treatment for that. So it's to some extent quite often perceived it's for people with mental health problems. It's something you do when you've got a problem, which straight away creates a bit of a problem for mindfulness in terms of trying to run a business. Because of how I came about finding out about it, I also looked an awful lot into its effect and use in business, and about how Google developed the Search Inside Yourself program, which had nothing to do with treating mental health issues. That was a leadership team. That was about them developing more creativity. It was about improving performance and decision making. But that hasn't really caught on in this country. About 5 years ago, I was at a business networking event called the Curry Club. And the format is you'd meet, you'd have a couple of drinks, you sit down at a table and have a curry. As we were sitting having the drinks before going down to the curry, I was chatting to people. The first person I talked to, I started talking about mindfulness, start talking about its roots in Buddhism. I thought, wow, not interested, mate. I'm not interested in this religious stuff. So the second person I started talking, I started talking about Google and LinkedIn and Apple, the organizations that use mindfulness. No, thanks, mate. Weren't interested. The third one was a solicitor. I'll talk about the science. I said, yeah, the neuroscience is identified because of neuroimaging. They can look inside your brain and see what's happening, and parts of the brain have actually been sort of grow with practice of mindfulness. So it's like Scientology then. Oh, nothing to do with Scientology. So I ended up sitting eating this meal and I talked about inflation. I talked about trespass law. I talked about all sorts of things, but I didn't talk about mindfulness again, all networking event. So yeah, it's evolved. There's still a lot of people who've never heard of it. If you talk about meditation, they've heard about meditation and they quite often think it's some sort of hippie thing or it's a religious thing. And trying to break that barrier is really quite challenging because it's not religious. The important thing is on its own, it does need those attitudes. It needs the mindful attitudes that John Kabat-Zinn talked about to give it some structure, some format. It's all well and good sitting and paying attention and noticing things that are going on. If you don't have a set of rules, I suppose, for how you deal with stuff, because the more you pay attention, the more you're going to see. So if you notice that you're really pissed off about something and you haven't got a set of rules that include things like letting go and acceptance, then you're just going to get angrier and angrier. So it's having those foundations is really important, which is
Yeah.
me angling into a little plug for the greatest book on mindfulness published in the last 3 months called Mindfulness with Attitude, available on Amazon, written by Rachel Jones-Wild and Mark Sidney. But yeah, that book focuses mainly on the attitudes. It's about the attitudes. It's all well and good meditating. Do you need something more to it? But trying to get that message across is challenging. And because people get very fixed views. It's either a mental health thing or it's a hippie thing or it's a this thing. And the word mindful is certainly everywhere in the UK. It's on the news all the time. You've got to be mindful of this. We've got to be mindful of that. But people are using it without really knowing what it means.
Yeah. I often reflected that as a therapist myself. So I've got a private practice where I do one-to-one therapy with guys. And the guys that come in and they're ready to do that inner work, they're ready to reflect on different situations, they're ready to be mindful about their lives, are the ones that I see just grow exponentially just from a few sessions. Whereas the guys that are dragged there kicking and screaming, maybe it's from their partner or the court's order or whatever, they're still holding on to those, I guess, beliefs about what mindfulness is, what therapy is as well. Just what is
Yeah.
this therapy thing? Why am I having to talk to a counselor or a social worker or a psychologist or a psychiatrist as well? And they're the ones that kind of get stuck, kind of like what you're saying, like 7, 10 years behind in this
Yeah.
discourse in their head. Like, this can't help me. And I was like that at first when I was first introduced to mindfulness. I was going through either depression, anxiety. It might have even been when I went through burnout in 2020, and I saw a mental health social worker, and she introduced me to Dr. Russ Harris from acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a lot of his work is what I base Mindful Men on.
Mhm.
And at first, I was like, that sounds a bit hippie, or that sounds a bit girly, or that sounds a bit wishy washy. I'm not going to do journaling all day, every day. Like, yeah, this is just not me. I'm a man. I just want to talk about my stuff. I want someone to wave a magical wand and fix me. So I parked it. But then I came back to it again when I was close to burnout a second time and really in a depressive state. And said, you know what? I didn't give mindfulness a go. I'm going to try something now because I've been doing all these other things. I've been drinking too much, eating the wrong foods, not sleeping properly, just basically abusing my body both mentally and physically. And so I opened my heart and soul up to mindfulness and just felt this wave of relief almost. Anxiety came down. I was able to do things, start learning different tools like breath work, meditation, and even I went and did a men's yoga group as well because I was having mysterious physical elements to my mental condition as well. And just found even just in yoga, the mindfulness coming into that in terms of being mindful of body scanning and slight movement and stretching and how beneficial this was. It's just opened my eyes once I was ready to reflect inwards and go, why am I holding this grudge against mindfulness, for example? Once I opened myself up to it, I just found it immensely beneficial. And I do this with the guys that I work with, and some of these guys love it. Like, I've got a guy that, yeah, has really struggled with mental health for a majority of his life. I've introduced him to mindfulness and he's just seeing the world in a different lens, which is just wonderful to watch. And you see his eyes light up when he's talking about
Yeah.
mindfulness as well. It is a powerful thing that I just wish more guys would be open to. And I think discussions like this can pave that way as well. Mark, I could talk to you all day. You're an amazing storyteller. I am interested on the business stuff as well. So I'm interested in how you see mindfulness as being beneficial in the workplace, both from a well-being, but also a productivity perspective as well.
Most of what I've done is tend to be with more with frontline stuff. In terms of like, an example would be there was a call center that I did some work with where I was doing regular meditation sessions and just linking it back into the male female thing. I would say 80% of the people who come are female. Yeah,
Mm.
since the women who come along to it, they're more open to that than men generally. But I would also say that the men are the ones who come back later on and say how much has changed their lives. To the extent that I had someone just the other day who connected with me on LinkedIn, who had been coming to my classes at this call center all 5 years ago and just got in touch to say how much it had helped them. And how, there's a couple of other people who are connected with on LinkedIn who said that it was classes that they came to that gave them focus for what they're doing. Their focus, they found their purpose through practicing mindfulness sessions I was doing. But in terms of well-being, there's a couple of quotes again from the call center. One was just basically, I don't cry every morning now before coming to work. I used to every single day, and I haven't cried. And that was after she's been coming to classes on a regular basis. And just simple, for me, the fact that there are people who are so hating their job, so terrified about their job, that they're crying because they have to go to work in the morning. It's horrendous. There was other who said she'd stopped taking a panic attack medication after going to my sessions. Again, I hadn't told her to do that, and I would never tell anyone to stop taking medication that I prescribed by the GP. But she felt comfortable with coming off a medication, so she'd stopped taking a medication because she didn't need it anymore. In terms of, but one of the criticisms that's been leveled against mindfulness is that in the workplace it teaches people to accept bad working conditions. Because one of the foundational attitudes is acceptance. It's acceptance. It's not acquiescence. It doesn't mean putting up with stuff. It's just accepting reality. If you accept reality rather than trying to block it out, then you can make better decisions about what you do next. And sometimes that does mean people go, actually, I don't want to work here anymore, and leave, which is probably a good thing for both them and the employer, because you don't want people working for you who aren't happy, because you're not going to perform. They're probably going to be on the sick more often than not, and they're probably going to slag you off every time they're in the pub. So if people choose to leave, then great. Others start finding purpose and meaning in what they do and start being happier. Certainly the call center is one of the big ones that I worked at for quite a long time. And there's a lot of people stay in touch or I bump into at the supermarket and stuff. And they tell me all the time about how much it's helped them. I'm currently doing quite a lot of stuff with Castle University and with the Capital City Council and delivering theme-based workshops. So specifically around focus and concentration, or specifically about self-care. And it's what I'm doing next month on Zoom fatigue, because it's a real thing. We behave differently when we're on camera, when we're in a meeting. If you and I were sitting next to each other or opposite each other, I still do this with my hands. But if you're sitting like that, if you look at the camera, you can maintain eye contact at all times. You hardly move, especially if you've got a fake background behind you, because it looks so weird every time you do. That does things to your posture, it does things, but it also creates cognitive overload because your brain's trying to work out what's going on. If one of your kids walked into your room right now, you'd look across and you'd know exactly what was going on. I'd just see you looking across, and then my brain would be trying to figure out what's happening. So it creates more cognitive overload, which means we get more fatigued, we get more tired. And so being able to deliver workshops that help people with specific areas. So those groups tend to be very, very different. The ones where it's a regular group, it's very different groups of people coming. If it's a one about sleep, for example, which again is not what mindfulness is about, but being aware of what you do at night, what you do during the day, planning your time, taking breaks, using meditation, using breath work can help relax you so that you are more likely to get a restful night's sleep. Practicing some of that hippie girly stuff like gratitude and writing down things you're grateful for at the end of the day can really help with a good night's sleep. But yeah, like you, when people first start talking to me about journaling, God no. But it does help. That's the thing. If you watch TV and stuff and, girls keep diaries and they write everything down, boys go and kick a football around. Changing that mindset is challenging. And whether it's changing it on a one-to-one basis as a therapist or whether it's doing it, going into businesses and trying to get people to open up. So some of those practices, and the gratitude practices, like one ones we talk about in the book, is keeping a gratitude jar where you just got some post-its and you've got a jar and you just write something down. You write things down you're grateful for throughout the day. You open it up at the end of the week and you go through it, or you open it up at the end of the year and go through it, whenever you choose to do that. But you've got that constant reminder of all those things you're grateful. Doing that at home is lovely. It's great for the family and everybody sharing and just saying thank you. And about all those cups of coffee that your wife made you, or all that stuff that happens throughout the year that we take for granted. It was lovely. But doing it in the workplace is phenomenal. Doing it in the workplace and going through at the end of the week, all your colleagues that have helped you out in different ways, all the things you're grateful for that's happened at work. Because normally we focus on the negative, we focus on the shit that's happened. So I think there's massive impact on just general people being happier, more content, and getting that balance. Everything is about balance ultimately. Getting that balance between taking care of yourself, taking care of your relationships, and taking care of your work. And what we tend to do is the opposite of that order. And that's the order we should do it in, is starting with ourselves, which is where that self-reflection, that self-kindness and compassion, girly stuff, comes in. Then it should be our relationships, because they're the things that really matter. Then it should be work. But what we do is we throw ourselves into work, and the busier we get at work, and we're always going to get busy at work because the more we do, there's always more to do, we start dropping off. Usually first we drop off anything that's about us. We maintain some of the stuff that's about relationships, but then it starts becoming the stuff that we have to do, and we even start talking about it differently. So instead of spending some quality time with the kids, it's I've got to look after the bands tonight. It starts becoming a negative. I can't do that report because the kids are screaming, rather than this is quality time that I'm never going to get back. And yeah, we start losing sight of it because our work can take over. So I think going into the workplace and giving people insight into how they can find that balance, because by finding that balance, by giving themselves some time, they're actually going to perform better at work. They're going to be more focused. They're going to be able to get the job done more. So I think certainly in terms of the level where most of the people I've worked, and it is varied quite considerably. So from the university, there's head of departments and stuff, and lecturers, whereas sometimes it's security staff. It varies massively. But the frontline staff that I've worked with, I've seen a lot of benefits in terms of mental health. And in terms of the business owner, senior managers I've worked with, again, I've just seen a lot of growth in terms of being able to focus and manage their time more effectively. And some of that has meant pulling away a little bit from work. I did some one-to-one. It was mainly coaching. It was employment coaching. It was career coaching. Did a lot of mindfulness stuff with him as I was doing the coaching. And he had an opportunity. It was a great opportunity to go work at another organization. Similar sort of work, but he was going to get paid a hell of a lot more. And he ended up staying where he was, because where he was, he had more freedom and flexibility in terms of working from home, more to spend time with his kids, spend time with his family. And he was willing to give up probably a 25% pay rise. But when he first came to me, he was asking for help for the interview to get this job. By the end of it, he still went for it, but he ended up turning it down. So it's not always necessarily in terms of success in the traditional meaning of success, but more in the real meaning of success, living life more effectively, living life more on purpose, living life more happily. And that mindfulness isn't going to make you happy all the time, but it is going to make you happier most of the time. And I
Yeah.
think that's the important thing. If we spend a hell of a lot of our time at work, so if we can be happier more of the time at work, then we're going to be happier more of the time in our lives.
And it can also give you the tools to find happiness as well. When you're really struggling, it can give you
Yeah.
the tools to rediscover the joy in life and fill your cup and start shifting the discourse internally from the glass being half empty to be half full. That's the benefit I've found as well. It's all around language, but internal language, and
Yeah.
shifting that to make it more positive.
Totally. I get quotes as Tony Robbins says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And yeah, it's that internal dialogue. When you change the way you talk to yourself and turn that into more positive and less negative, then you start thinking about it, you start feeling different, you start being different. And it's changing that internal dialogue, but it also changes the way you talk to others. So then starts to strengthen your relationships with your friends, with your loved ones. It can be so powerful, but it's not easy, and it does take practice. And we live in a world where people want quick fixes, and it doesn't offer that. It definitely doesn't offer that, which again is part of that lack of understanding.
Now, Mark, we'll put the links into Mindful Therapies and Mindful Impact into
Yeah,
the show
please do,
notes.
yeah.
Is that the best place for people to find you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place to contact me, or either of the two websites, the Mindful Therapies website for more the social type stuff, or the donation based stuff, and the Mindful Impact for the business stuff. And we do have some stuff that's online that's available to everyone. So we do some little short meditations throughout the week on Facebook, through our Facebook page. So on a Monday, it's an intention setting meditation to set your intention for the week ahead. On a Wednesday, it's a gratitude meditation. And then on a Friday, it's a little wins meditation. It's really the little thing, because it's the little victories, the little steps that actually lead to the big wins. But we tend to ignore them and think, we're always being shit because I didn't achieve anything massive. But actually, you achieve so much each day. So celebrating those. So yeah, so there's the Facebook, mindfulness-based therapies on Facebook. We do have Twitter and Instagram accounts, but we don't use them that often. We've got a YouTube channel that's got some really good meditation stuff on. Mindfulness with Attitude is available on Amazon. and all good bookstores. But within that, there is a link. You don't need to buy the book to get the link, because you just go on the website and click on the registration thing. But we've got a members area that has a link to 19 guided meditations that are available for free for as long as our website exists. But little meditations that you can do at any time, and ranging from stuff like decision making, like head, heart, gut meditations, to self-compassion breaks, to things that help focus and concentration. So lots of different sensory exercise, which is a really good practice. The website is probably the best starting place.
I've got one more question before you go, and I like to always ask this question from my guests as well. In light of what we've been talking about is filling our cups and finding more joy in our days, I'd love you to plug something that makes you feel good at the moment. And it doesn't have to be anything mindfulness-based. It can be if you want to, but it could be something you're watching or listening to or reading. Yeah, what's something that makes you feel good at the moment?
The thing that's making me feel good at the moment is the club that I support and have supported all my life are actually doing well at the minute. We're having the best season we've had in about 20 years. So going to the match and actually thinking we might win a game is awesome. But it's also the whole, going back to, yes, there are quite a few women these days going to the match, but it's still 80% male. So football here is very much a male-dominated sport. And there is something about, talking about men sharing emotions and stuff. There are grown men jumping up and down and hugging each other, kissing each other sometimes. You've never met them before, but you're their best mate, because your team has just scored a goal. There's a thing about connection that sport can bring that is absolutely phenomenal. There's a time when men are shamelessly emotional. They will cry when their team get relegated or they lose. They will jump with joy. They will smile. They will laugh. They will sing their heart out until their throat hurts. And they'll do it together as a group. So yeah, the thing that came to mind, partly because I've just been down to London to watch them at Wembley, and the atmosphere was awesome. But yeah, the joy that comes from your team winning more than they lose. But the joy of sharing that sense of belonging. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love it. As a sports mad country, I'm right into my sports, both my Aussie rules footy, but also my soccer. I'm a mad fan of the Adelaide United Soccer Club, and I really do understand what you're saying in terms of when things are down, it's not great, but then when things are up, it's even better. Mark, thanks for getting mindful with me today. I really have loved this conversation, and we could probably go on for another 6 hours, but I am mindful I've got to get the kids to school.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for your time again. I look forward to the episode coming out and also following your journey along the way too.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to chat. It's been lovely. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, Simon. Take care.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode, and I hope you got some value from it. If anything triggered your mental health today, please reach out to your support networks. Also, if you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your mates. For more from Mindful Men, you can check us out on Instagram and YouTube, and I'll throw the links to these pages in the show notes below. But until next time, stay mindful.